Great. Thank you, Christy. Thanks, Christy. And hello, everyone. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to join us. I'm going to give you just a quick little background here about myself. David, just to let you know, David Noyes, my co-presenter, unfortunately had a last-minute emergency, so he is not going to be joining us today. But a little bit about David. He is the head of our curriculum. He is the person behind our standards-based assessments and standards-based lessons. He has his national boards in English language development, and he has over 28 years experience working with English learners. He is the ELD coach for Long Beach Unified School District over all ELs K-12. And he's just a fantastic guy. It's unfortunate he can't be with us today, but that's okay. And a little bit about myself and Language Tree Online. We've been around since 2003. We've always been focused on language acquisition. We spent the past 5 years solely focused on English language development, specifically for our secondary English learners. The reason that we did this, a few reasons. One is in our research and in David's research in getting his national boards, there really wasn't a lot available for our secondary students that is standards-based, which is unfortunate because, as we all know, they have the shortest ramp before graduation, and they really need, the extra support. So that's a little bit of background. But for today, what I plan on doing is just talking at a very high level as far as the impact of COVID on English learners. This came from a data assessment conference that I attended recently. And then, so I kind of want to give you a big picture and then talk about what out of the conference they talk about EL support initiatives. And then we'll get into more of how we can assess our ELs and then the standards-based tailored instruction based on those assessment results. So these next few slides, again, these came from the 2021 National Conference on Student Assessment. And I know it's a busy slide, we're not going to read through it all, but at a high level, it's talking about the impact of the pandemic on our English learners. And as most of us, I'm sure on this call know, that they make up nearly 10%, and in some states that is percentage is quite a bit higher of our student population. And most of these students, come from households below the poverty line. And it's, the pandemic has been extremely rough for these students. So if we go to the next slide, we can see how it impacted them. So overall, all of our students, there was a loss of education due to the past year and a half. But for our English learners, the data is showing they lost a year, approximately 1 year and 4 months of education. So it's really unfortunate. And maybe some of you on the call, even saw this firsthand, but, these are little clips that the conference did from news articles about the fact that a lot of these students were just missing during online learning. They weren't showing up. Districts were reaching out to these students and they were just unable to connect with them. So this is, a big reason why there was the large learning loss. So just kind of to sum it up, as we all know, there's 4 domains of learning any language. And this just kind of shows what happened in the 2019-2020 school year compared to the 2020-2021 school year. So there was an overall decrease. The 2 domains where it was really impacted was both speaking and writing. So what do we do now? So that's kind of, what happened, what transpired. And I really like this slide that they had at the conference, because they talked about, how can we use this data to transform learning? And so they talked a lot about looking for language development programs, specifically standards-based language development programs, and looking for programs that can be used not only in the classroom, but at home for remote learning as well. And they talked a lot about, extensive tutoring programs. So I know, like in the state of Texas, they're doing a lot of tutoring initiatives where they're doing 3 times a week tutoring sessions specifically for their English learners. And then, of course, other opportunities such as summer school or after school programs and enrichment programs. So finding more opportunities outside of our regular day for these students to help them catch up. So now I'm just switching gears a little bit and talking a bit about Language Tree Online and some of the different options. So the curriculum is a hybrid curriculum in the sense that it can be used both at school and at home. There's a full year-long, school year-long ELD program. It consists of entry and exit assessments. There's 60 standards-based online lessons, downloadable instruction routines, practice assignments, and for our newcomers, there is a acculturation module developed specifically to support our newcomer students to help them with getting comfortable in their new American school environment, addressing their social and emotional needs, and helping them gain that functional vocabulary. And then these next few programs, the after school program, enrichment programs, tutoring programs, are all programs that are a subset of the school year program. So being able to utilize this curriculum in a condensed fashion and working with students. We have a lot of our districts this year are doing Saturday school programs. Several others are doing after school programs for their English learners. It works a little bit differently than the full year curriculum, but nonetheless, it is standards-based for the assessments and the lessons. So one thing I like to do is just, there's a lot of different terminology as far as levels. And I think it's important for me to point out that our curriculum has been aligned, and we have documentation supporting California 2012 ELD, WIDA 2020, TEKS in Texas, New York Next Gen ELA standards. So we are aligned with all of those ELD standards. But one thing I think can be confusing, so I just wanted to bring it to the forefront, is when we talk about ELD or ELD Level 1, who is this suitable for? So once again, this is suitable for our secondary ELs that are newcomers and beginning English learners. And our ELD Level 1, of course, has the standards-based entry and exit assessments. And then we have our online lessons that fall into foundational literacy skills, collaborative listening and speaking, and language function and construction. And then we also have downloadable resources for educators that help support those students in small group or whole class instruction. And again, reinforce that language function or skill and complement each of the online lessons. In our level 2, and just to let you know too, that the curriculum was written as a continuum. So it starts with ELD Level 1, and then it was written as a continuum with ELD Level 2. So, and the Level 2 is really geared more towards our intermediate or our expanding English learners and for our long-term English learners. It's set up and structured the exact same way. The rigor goes up quite a bit from Level 1, I will say that. But the assessments, the entry assessment, it's a little bit longer. Instead of 75 questions, there's 81 questions all in. And you'll see those same 3 areas: the foundational literacy skills, collaborative listening and speaking, and language function and construction. One nuance that's a little different in level 2 is we have our downloadables that, again, teachers in this case use as warm-up and modeling with their students. And then we also have practice assignments built right into the program where the students are typing into the program and submitting for their teacher's review. I'm going to pause here for a second because I do see a chat. Okay. Just want to make sure I didn't miss a question. So, so let me talk a little bit about how everything is structured. So whether it's our level 1 or our level 2 entry or exit assessment, so the name kind of says it all. The entry assessment is really to serve as a baseline, and different than state testing like the WIDA Access, or in California, the LPAC. And those really help us look at our ELs and redesignate when appropriate. Our entry assessment really serves to pinpoint skill gaps. So unlike state assessments, we don't put multiple standards into each question. We only put a single standard, ELD standard, in a question, but we have more than one question with that standard in it. The reason that we did that was when teachers and educators then look at the data, they'll be able to pinpoint the skill gaps where that student needs additional support. So what we did is we put, as I mentioned before, we have these 3 areas. I like to refer to them as buckets for lack of a better term, but we have the foundational literacy skills bucket, the collaborative listening and speaking bucket, and the language function and construction bucket. And we put 25 questions in each assessment area. You know, we never recommend having a student sit down and doing a 75 question assessment. That's too much, but it is all online. So the nice thing is, you know, they can start with foundational literacy skills and then just pick up next time where they left off. And this can be done over a series of days. So those standards-based assessments, entry assessments, then correspond to the standards-based lesson modules. So this particular slide is really talking about our ELD level 1. And I know it's really small type, so it's hard to see, but just to kind of give you a feel for, so in the foundational literacy skills, well, let's say this, in all 3 of these buckets, we have a uniform teaching style. So the virtual professor provides the lesson input. And then after that input, there are interactive exercises which are tracked and graded by the system. And the main thing is to recognize when they're in the program. Let's say that after the assessment, let me jump back and say this. Once students take all 3 areas of the entry assessment, and then you look at the data, our rule of thumb is students that are anywhere 90% or below in any of these 3 areas, they would do that equivalent area in the lesson modules. And the reason why we have that 91% rule is that we want our students to have a level of mastery before moving on to level 2, where the rigor goes up substantially. Also, because there was unfortunately a lot of learning loss, this is a great way to, you know, get our students, you know, back on track and have them have some success in the program and some wins and gain some confidence before jumping into a, you know, a much more challenging rigor. So anyway, so back to the lesson module. So it's, you know, the virtual professor provides the lesson input, then there's the interactive questions that are tracked and graded by the system. And then we have the downloadable lessons, and teachers use these lessons, like I mentioned, in whole class or small group. And it's a great way to get them using their oral language skills, their writing skills, and really make your own formative assessment as far as how that student is or students are doing with that particular language function or skill. So you can see on the right-hand side, in the foundational literacy skills, there's 9 lessons. And for level 1, we're really covering the items that, you know, our students are learning in kinder, 1st and 2nd grade. But as we know, a lot of our English learners don't have that foundation. And when we developed this, we were really cognizant that this is for an older student, a middle school or a high school level student. So there's no cartoon characters, sing-along songs, that kind of thing, which is very off-putting for an older student. We made it very relevant for an older student, but helping them gain that also important foundation. And then in collaborative listening and speaking, there's 12 lessons. And then, again, with the virtual professor and the activities that follow the input that are tracked and graded by the system, and the downloadable lessons. And over here on the right, I know it's small text, but it highlights what each lesson covers. So just to let you know too, that each lesson covers a standard, and depending on the complexity of the standard will determine how long the lesson is. So standards that have like a part A, a part B, a part C, those will be longer than maybe a real straightforward lesson like letter sounds in foundational literacy skills. And then the last bucket area, language function and construction, has 7 lessons. Again, structured the exact same way. Something to note too is that we are a supplemental curriculum, and the nice thing is there's a lot of flexibility when using the program. So oftentimes, I've done a lot of observations where a teacher will launch the video full class, and they'll stop and start the video and check for understanding and get the students interacting. So you can be used in a number of ways. It doesn't always have to be, the student working independently. You can launch the video and amplify what the virtual professor is saying, and going through it that way. And then this next slide, just want to talk a minute about the American School Culture module. So what I always like to say as it relates to American school culture is forget about the standards-based lessons, the standards-based assessments, because American school culture has nothing to do with ELD standards. It has everything to do with helping our newcomer students acculturate and help them with their social emotional needs and gaining functional vocabulary, because they're in a new country, a new culture, a new school environment. And so our goal was really to help them understand the ins and outs of school in America. So we broke it down into 6 chapters. These are the chapters here. And we have that same uniform teaching style where there's the video input, and then there's interactive questions. Because it's for our newcomer students, the question types are very simple and straightforward, yes, no type questions. And then we have a 3rd section that we call vocabulary builder. And in the vocabulary builder, we also have video input and interactive exercises. But again, this is scaffolded vocabulary. So we're just trying to expand the vocabulary within that same topic area for each one of these lessons. And the other thing about American school culture, the video input, they can select either English or Spanish, because again, this has nothing to do with the standards. And then we have downloadable activities for each one of these online lessons in American school culture. So to give you some, ideas, is that like for our SLIFE students or our real newcomers that don't have transferable language skills, oftentimes this is a great place to start. And even just starting with the downloadable activities and working with those newcomers, using the downloadable activities in a small group is a great way to get going before jumping right in to the program.
Jennifer, I just wanted to pop in with a question that came in chat.
Okay.
It was, how long is each module or lesson, and what does the pacing for the students look like?
Yeah, thank you for your question. That question comes up a lot. So, I don't have a great answer as far as how long, because it really depends on, so each lesson covers a standard. So it depends on the standard for that particular lesson. So there's 60 lessons in the comprehensive curriculum, meaning ELD 1 and ELD Level 2. And the length varies because it really just depends on the complexity of the standard. But one thing that we have done that we built into the platform under the teacher resource section is we do have sample weekly planner templates. And those are to help you really just serve as a guide as to how you could use this, because you can use this, it's very flexible in a multitude of ways, but it helps you with like your lesson planning. The other thing that we do that we include in our program is we offer 2 times a month office hours where our educators from Florida to California can Zoom in and get questions answered, and we can help with lesson planning and just, really any type of question that may come up. So I don't know if I answered your question, but hopefully that helped a little bit. Well, maybe I'll say one more thing. I will tell you that there is a lot of curriculum. So if the program is used with fidelity, it easily lasts an entire school year. Okay, I'm gonna jump ahead. So I think, I think we're done talking about American school culture. And then I just want to spend a minute here and talk about our ELD Level 2 lessons. So you can see it's set up exactly the same way as Level 1. And again, it's the same teaching style where the virtual professor provides the lesson input. And then the questions that follow that will really be, testing their comprehension of that lesson input, and that is tracked and graded by the system. The other thing too, just to let you know, is that in the longer lessons that there's multiple parts, the virtual professor will come up multiple times, 5, 6 times. So the lesson may start with, lesson input about text structure, and then there'll be like 8 questions related to being able to identify what type of text structure, and then there'll be the next lesson input from the virtual professor can be around making inferences. And then there'll be a multitude of questions after that, assessing their knowledge of making, how to make appropriate inferences based on what you see and hear. So they can, some of the lessons can get really quite long. Some of the lessons in the Level 2, really, we are finding, we like to call them keystone lessons from the perspective, it just makes really good sense to launch them full class, because pretty much everybody can benefit from them, and you can start and stop the video. You can have your students have language notebooks, have them chunk and chew, have them verbalize some of the things that they've learned, have them write it in their language notebook. There's a lot of techniques and resources that we have available that we recommend. And sorry, I got a little off topic there, but for foundational literacy skills in our Level 2, I just wanted to point out this is really advanced foundational literacy skills. So instead of 9 lessons, there's 13. And it's some challenging things like being able to identify diphthongs, our controlled vowels, complex spelling patterns. And what's interesting is the data shows oftentimes that it is the advanced foundational literacy skills where our LTELs struggle, because a lot of times they speak very well, but it's when they get into their writing is often where, some of the gaps reside. So then the collaborative listening and speaking, as I mentioned, the Level 2, this rigor goes up quite a bit. And you'll notice in our Level 2, that's when we're really getting into that cross-curricular subject integration. So you'll see science, math, social science, and what have you. The other nuance with Level 2 is the downloadable resources for the teachers are really more about modeling and warming up with our students. And then you can send them back into the program. So in addition to, for example, the 12 online lessons, we also have 12 practice assignments. And that's where the students are typing right into the program. And when they complete that particular lesson, they'll submit all, and that's when you get a review to see how they're doing, look at their writing, and determine, what you think as far as if they are mastering that language function or skill. And then lastly, the language function and construction has the 7 lessons that, with the virtual professor and the interactive activities, the downloadables, and the practice assignments. So I know we're almost out of time, and I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. So I'm going to stop here and open it up for any questions.
Jennifer, I'm just taking a look at the chat, so just give me one moment.
Sure.
My students are all long-term ELs. Can you speak a little more about how your program might be utilized by a designated ELD teacher with long-term EL?
Yeah, thanks, Christy. Great question. So what we would recommend is initially have your LTELs start with the ELD Level 1 entry assessment, just to see, to make sure that in those 3 areas that I keep talking about, foundational literacy skills, collaborative listening and speaking, language function and construction, just to make sure they are above 90% in all 3 of those areas. That means they've, mastered those skills. If they are below 90 in any of those areas, then have them go through the equivalent lesson module in level 1, because even though they're a long-term English learner and we may think they're outside or above level 1, oftentimes there could be gaps there, particularly in collaborative listening and speaking and language function and construction, where there's more complexity, also coupled with the fact that there has been learning loss. But if your LTELs do get above 90% in all 3 of those areas, then you can start them with the level 2 entry assessment. And from there, rest assured, you'll be able to see the gaps in those 3 areas, and then have them work through the applicable lesson modules, as well as, supporting them through the downloadables, and even if you want to launch, full class with a classroom of LTELs.
Great. And then speaking of language transfer skills, a lot of my newcomers don't have any. So how could they use this program?
Yeah, another really good question. So, and we've seen that a lot with several of our districts in California and Florida. I'm sure elsewhere too, but we've been seeing a lot of SLIFE students, and in that case, we really recommend, we actually have a guide that's in the teacher resource section that talks about how best to use the program based upon, the makeup of your English learners. But to answer your question, we would recommend just starting off using the downloadable activities in American school culture, and give them some background and some knowledge, and work with those students before having them go into the program. So giving them that schema to start.
Great. And then are these lessons aligned with New York State standards?
They are. We have documentation that we can share if you'd like us to, with New York Next Gen ELA standards.
Yeah, and I think I can include a link to that on the follow-up email as well.
Oh, great. Thanks, Christy.
And then just one more question, it looks like. You were talking about getting scores on tests. Does it allow them to go back and try to elevate their scores, or do they just get one try?
Oh, yeah, great. I'm glad you asked that, because so the assessments, like the entry assessment, it's just a one-time, right? Because the goal there is really just to be able to identify the skill gaps for our students. So that's just a one shot. But once they're in the lesson modules, they're going to start with lesson 1, and they need to, it's factored into the program, they need to get 80% or higher to move on to lesson 2. If they get below 80%, the system will prompt them to redo that lesson. And the system does auto shuffle answers, so it doesn't look exactly the same, but they need to get 80% or higher before they move on, because each lesson builds upon the next. But from a teaching perspective too, it allows you to go in and look at the data, and you can see how many attempts a student has tried. So if a student, let's say it took them 4 attempts to complete lesson 3 before they could move on to lesson 4, then that's a pretty good indicator that intervention needs to happen with the language skill in lesson 3. And you can do that by using the downloadable instructional routines, which we use input model check in level 1. In level 2, you can use the downloadables for modeling and then work with them either independently or with them doing the practice assignments. So we always make sure we have an intervention, because not everybody is going to get the 80% or higher the first time around.
Great, and I think that wraps up the questions. Let me just make sure. Yep, it looks like all the questions we have so far.
Okay. Well, again, thank you everybody for your time. And just so you know, Studica is our partner in education. So if you'd like to see a demo, firsthand of the curriculum, or you want to get a quote, or whatever you may need, please reach out to Studica. Their contact information is on the slide here. And again, thank you for your time today.
Great, and thank you, Jennifer, and everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And just a reminder that there is a short survey, so if you could just take a moment and fill that out for us, we would really appreciate it. And thank you, and have a great day.